Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's happening, Rush Nation, and welcome to 5 Yard Rush. First of all, I would like to apologise for last week having no show whatsoever. The Dynasty crew were doing a bit of a reset, and I wasn't aware that Murph wasn't going to be well enough to do his show until the end of the week because we were really trying to get it done. And by the time we'd realised that we couldn't get it done, there wasn't enough time for me to prep because I was going on holiday at the end of the week. So I want to apologise, first off, for there not being a show last week. Second of all, I'd like to wish Murph well. He's feeling a little bit under the weather at the moment. If you're watching on the video show, you will see that Murph is not joining me, but somebody else is. So I'm sure you'll all like to wish Murph well and hope he gets back to some resemblance of full fitness very, very soon. Next point of order, if you'd like to support the podcast, head over to patreon.com/5yardrush. Head over there. There are some ranks. That's because today's show is about creating rankings. There are some tiers that we use over there, so you can support in different ways. You get different perks and stuff for being a Patreon. Follow the podcast on Twitter at 5 Yard Rush. Now, today's podcast is going to be hugely, hugely visual, which I know if you were listening audio-wise does not help one tiny little bit. But today is about creating rankings. And in order to do that, I thought, who do I know is an Excel wizard, somebody who enjoys creating rankings because it was there to help me when I went through my rankings procedure way back when, several years now. Murph isn't here. Let's bring in the wizard of Excel that is the Fast Action Friday host, is 5 Yard Rob. Rob, if you just want to know him as a name, not at 5 Yard Rob. He's the lead editor of Redraft over at 5 Yard Rush. And as I said, Excel wizard. Rob, welcome to the Flagship, my friend. Today is a show all about rankings, and I couldn't think of anybody else better to help me through this process.
Yeah, absolutely happy to help. I think you might be getting sick of me like dropping in some rankings in some of our other chats as well. So perhaps we can use my power for good rather than for evil. Happy to come in and jump in. Like this is something that I've been trying to tweak for a long time. And I feel as though I'm at a certain stage in my developments of how I come up with rankings. So, you know, there's still a long way to go, a long journey to go. So if I can help you see where I am, and then perhaps we can encourage other people to put together rankings for themselves.
Yeah, so like I said, today's show is going to be hugely visual. Rob's going to be sharing his rankings model and projection sheet and stuff like that on the screen. So do head over to YouTube. Do watch this video because it will be much more informative. We'll try and make it as best we can for audio. But once again, head over to the YouTube, 5 Yard Rush, hit the like, hit the bell so you get the notifications for when we go live. But most importantly, this show will make a whole lot more sense if you go over to the YouTube and watch it there. Rob, I suppose we should start with, why did you want to get into doing your own rankings? Because it's very easy to plug into Google fantasy football rankings. Maybe you subscribe to a website here or a website there. They have their own rankings. Why did you start doing your own rankings rather than, you know, choosing someone to follow? Or was it a case of you wanted to just see if you perhaps had not a better, but a different way of going about it, or you just wanted to blow stuff up and create an Excel spreadsheet?
Well, I do love the spreadsheets. So that might have been a reason for it. No, I always wondered, like, when people came out with the rankings, I always wondered what their process was. Because if everyone had the same process, all the rankings would be the same. And there must be some kind of divergence somewhere along the line where someone looks at one thing and another analyst looks at something else. So I thought, I'm going to do a little bit of digging, see what I can come up with. And there was a program from Kyle Yates, I believe. It was a ranking system that was recommended to me as well, which was a really good basis. And I thought maybe there's some other things here that I can develop as well. So I've kind of taken that as a template, added things on, bolt it on a bit like, Frankenstein's monster, and come up with something absolutely crazy. So it was just to start off with an interest, and it's turned into something far bigger than that.
So I like I mentioned a couple of years ago, I started using Kyle Yates's projection rankings. I guess, what do we call it? Model? Is it a model? Is it it's a Google Sheets. I suppose it works on Excel as well, but I use it on Google Sheets. And it is essentially a list of teams where you input the players, and then there's a whole load of code in there, which I don't understand. Thankfully, Kyle created it. It works out. You put in attempts, rushes, catches, that sort of thing, target percentage. And then it uses the code that he's put in, and it spits out fantasy points for the season. And then you can do it weekly as well. You can break down, you can change the numbers in it to. So then I thought, Rob's pretty good at this sort of stuff, and you jumped on and helped me do my initial rankings, and we walked through each team and what we thought was who was going to get what and attempts and all of that business, and it spat out my rankings. And then from there, I'm assuming it is I've seen it. It is a very different thing to what I saw a couple of years ago. And I think if you were to, very kindly, you did say it was Kyle Yates's base model, but if you were to, you could claim it as yours because it is so different now as to what it started as. And from what I've seen, it looks not only easier to use, but much more intuitive. And from that base model, what have you tweaked from then to now? And I suppose in that question, second up, what do you think are the categories that matter and you've increased or decreased in the model for fantasy football? Because we all know that certain categories do affect fantasy football, but then other people weight different categories. Like you said, if everybody used exactly the same things, everybody's ranks would be different. So what have you added to yours or taken away, or what categories do you think is important for your fantasy rankings?
That's a good question. And I think from that base model, what has changed is that I have adjusted the number of players available at each position, because as we've seen in the past few years, there's only really 3 or 4 tight ends it could really make a difference in any kind of fantasy ranking. So the base model started out with 4 or 5 tight ends available for you to pick for each team, and I've reduced that down to 3, and that is primarily because if it looks a bit silly if you've only got 1 there.
Yeah.
And the different teams do use more than 1 tight end, but in terms of the fantasy relevance of all 3, it's very, 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 very rare that you get all 3 used. So we reduced this down to 3. We've still got 4 running backs in there. We've still got 5 or 6 wide receivers available. And something that has changed for me, compared to the base model, is that we now see rookie quarterbacks coming in and taking a percentage of the snaps, particularly towards later on when they want to try someone new. So there is now a mode for you to be able to select what you think the percentage of the passing attempts are going to be for like a rookie quarterback coming in compared with the veteran that's already there. So you can put in a number of rush attempts or a number of pass attempts, and it will break it down based on those percentages for the quarterbacks as well. And we'll be able to see that in a bit as well. Something else that I've changed in this model is I've added in the ability to add custom points. With a lot of these different tournaments, Scottish Ball, we've got our very own FFCC as well, which I believe is coming together in some of the forming of the stages as well, which is really exciting. Everyone's got their own different point schemes, so there's now the ability to put in custom scoring, and you can put in what the scoring is for a tournament that's coming up, and you can get the rankings for that, and then you can work down the draft board when your draft's going on and say, right, that quarterback's gone, right, I can cancel him off, and you can see what are the next best players coming up based on your models for your competition rankings.
And I think that's really important, because what we see with fantasy football year in, year out is, you go back 5 years, it was basically standard 2 running back, 2 wide receiver. If your league was a bit funky, maybe it was PPR. Superflex wasn't even a thing.
No.
Then PPR became a thing, and there's like, well, these receivers are catching the ball, they should get an extra point. And then we saw the birth of Superflex into the mainstream, where people were saying, well, there's only 12 teams in my fantasy league, and yet there's 32 quarterbacks. Quarterbacks don't matter. Let's make them matter. Let's now have it to 24. and then you're at a disadvantage if you don't have 3 because it's Superflex, it's 12 team, and then we've got tight end premium, and I think it is now, especially in home leagues that are established, scoring settings are changing to try and make it a bit unique, because when you jump into a random league on Sleeper, like on Facebook, if somebody says, well, I've got a team here that a league that needs a team, you jump in, or I'm setting up a redraft for this year, it's a standard PPR, 2 running back, maybe 3 wide receivers, 2 flex, super flex if it's saucy, but it's pretty standard. Whereas home leagues now are diversifying, I think, quite a lot. You know, you and I are in a league together, a home league together, and the league scoring in that is absolutely bananas. I've talked about it for the last few weeks on here, where the running backs are valued, you know, running back 13, 14 is even more expensive than the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. So I think that having that in your model is superb, because if you are a serious fantasy player, or even trying to get into playing a little bit more serious, and you can't go into Google and you can't go to Fantasy Pros, and it'll just be PPR. Whereas if you can plug them into this and say, well, actually, this guy's worth a lot more in my league here, or if you are new to the Scott Fish Bowl or any of the competitions that are now, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of charity tournaments, and they've all got their variances. You know, they've all followed the Scott Fish Bowl really, and having a unique scoring system year in, year out. So to be able to tweak that is massive, I think, in a rankings model. Even if you don't want to do the rankings yourself and you want to copy other people's projections, but then use this for your scoring for your league, I think that on its own is standalone. So it's massive. Before we do bring it up on the screen, Rob, is there anything else you want to talk about? You know, how you got to increasing the scale of the monster that you've created, rather than just being an annual rankings thing where you plug it in preseason. Because we're in that point now where, you know, the draft's done, rookie drafts are either being done or coming up, because people can't wait for preseason for some reason for their rookie drafts. We're getting to that lull now where fantasy football it's rankings. You know, we're getting into the projections now. We're seeing how OTAs get on. We're seeing what we think is going to break down going into summer, and this is where people start to build their rankings process. So is there anything else that you've added to this, rather than just being an annual thing that you do now? Is there anything that you've added that possibly you could use in season? Is there a weekly option for scoring? Have you added opponents or schedules or anything like that makes it even more in depth?
Absolutely. And this is something that was worrying for me last time, is that you could set a yearly model and then you could just leave it, and then, you know, instantly the person you had as your wide receiver 5 or 6 could just get injured for the season. You know, we saw Cooper Kupp go out very, very disappointingly for a lot of the people who drafted him very highly. So what I have done for this new model is I have done a schedule running for each team for each week, and you have the ability to create a copy, reset everything on it, and then use it as a weekly model. And one of the nice features about this, and one that I definitely think you'll agree will save a lot of time, is I have created a database of over 1,000 players, including the 2023 rookies. So you can take out a player from that rankings screen, type in the new rookie that you want to add in, and it will appear instantly with their yards per reception, yards per carry. You know, if it was a quarterback, it would have the potentially even the sack rate in there for custom scoring. So there's a lot of flexibility for being able to turn it into a weekly model as well.
Excellent. And have you added the schedule in there for players who they're going to be facing throughout the season? Is that in there?
Do you mean like the teams that they're facing?
Yeah.
Yes, including the bye weeks as well. So you'll know that if it says week 1 they're playing this team, week 2 they're at this team, week 3 they're versus this team. So you can look down the side of the team's list and say, right, if we're on week 5, this is who they're playing. You go to like the next team, week 5, who they're playing, and then you can see, right, this is going to be a tough team. I may give them more passing attempts and rushing because they're going to be behind early on, in my opinion. So then you can start, sharing them out that way. It also gives you a percentage of, the number of passes you're giving to each position unit as well. So if you've got a team that are very heavily favouring passing to the running back on drop backs, then you can equate that in as well.
Rob, I think it's time for us to show the world the monster you created. If you are listening on the podcast, we're 15 minutes in. This is where it's going to get visual. So I do recommend heading over to YouTube and watching from there, because it's going to get pretty exciting pretty quick. It is phenomenal, Rob. I'm not going to lie. It has moved on significantly since I've last seen it. So I'm excited to dig in with you as we go through this to try and explain to people, why they should perhaps consider starting their own rankings and what we get from ranking ourselves as opposed to following generic stuff online. So if you would be so kind, Rob, let's throw it up on the screen for those watching at home.
Absolutely. Do we want the ranking system straight away, or do you want to start with some of the data that I might have a look at to try and work out those, passing attempts and rushing attempts?
And I think maybe if we use the ranking model on the screen, we can then talk about some of the data you've used, because I think that would probably be quite visually disabling for people's eyes if they don't know what they're looking at.
Well, this is quite a treat to start with, isn't it? So we'll share the front page of the ranking system. Whoa.
Yeah, so here we go. It's now on the screen, and as I said, it is completely different from anything that I've seen from what it was before. So Rob, for those at home, would you like to talk through what we're currently looking at?
So this is the front page of the ranking projection and ranking system. And before, whether it was just like the slide bar at the bottom, now we've got a selection of click buttons that you can click on to go to any of these teams on here. And then you've also got the option to go to quarterback ranks, running back ranks, wide receiver ranks, tight end ranks, and then the overall ranking system as well. And then you've got this big scary red button over here that says reset, which will delete all my rankings. So I'm not going to press that just yet. We've also got the scoring systems button here as well. So that's where you can change the standard scoring for your standard, your PPR scoring, your tight end premium scoring. And then you've also got the custom scoring options on there as well. And
these are all live buttons, aren't they? They're not just
They're
not just cells that have been nicely coloured. They all do stuff.
So I'm afraid to click on one now because if it doesn't work, I'll be very disappointed. So let's click on Baltimore. Hey, there we go.
Wowzers! Look at this.
So you can see you've got the schedule on the left-hand side, and I've got the passing target projections, which is 540 for the whole season, and the rushing attempts, which is 500 for the whole season. Now, that passing targets projection is actually around 100 more than what they had last season, simply because of the change in offensive coordinator. So I've already adjusted that based upon the change in coaching.
Okay, so whilst we're on Baltimore, and you said there's 100 more there, how did you? So I say we. I've had absolutely nothing to do with this whatsoever. I'm just going to use it soon to create my own rankings for the season. Rob, how do you decide on these initial team numbers? Obviously, Greg Roman's gone. Mm-hmm. What have you got that's given them 100 more passing targets? Sorry, is that you just deciding on previous history, or have you averaged out? Where have you got 540 from compared to 440?
So again, this is probably a little bit sad as well. Passionate. It's passionate. It's not sad. It's passionate.
There we go.
So I have looked at every single team's head coach and every single team's offensive coordinator, and then I've looked at their history in any season that they've been a head coach or an offensive coordinator, because those are the two positions that are likely to do play calling, likely to come up with target shares, the run of the game scripts. So we've gone back through John Harbaugh's history, and we've gone back through Greg Roman's history as well. He's gone now, so we don't have to worry about his as much, but we do have to consider the new offensive coordinators play history as well. And what we have seen is that he does pass the ball a lot more than Greg Roman. So you look at his average over the last 5 years, over the last 3 years, and then you create a number from that, combined with John Harbaugh's numbers as well. And 540 is roughly what I've produced. I've also looked at the schedule as well. So based on last year and the year before, they both got Baltimore got 8 and 9 in both seasons, but the rushing and the passing numbers were very different, and they still end up with the same record. This year, their schedule does look a lot kinder than it did last year, and if we expect Lamar to stick around I also feel there's going to be a bump up in numbers there as well. So that's what I've baked in to this prediction as well. So it's not only with the coaches, but it's also based on schedule as well.
I think looking at this now, Rob, on the screen, I'll try and explain it for the people at home who are listening audio-wise. We've got Baltimore up on the screen. So as Rob said, there's the rushing yards per reception, team yards per carry. They're not on the right-hand side of that. You've got your sections for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. And on the right of that, you've got scoring, which gives you your points per standard, half, and PPR. The rest of it, if you wanted to tweak it, I'm assuming being the scorings tab back on the home screen. I think, Rob, this is a good opportunity if you want to do this right now. Mm-hmm. I look through the wide receivers here, and I don't see Odell Beckham Jr. on the list of the Baltimore wide receivers.
Okay.
So why don't we add him in, and we can show people how the model actually works live on the screen, rather than trying to, describe it through clicking and not clicking.
So let's just check to make sure that Odell Beckham is in our player data first. Otherwise, we'll be typing in.
It's OBJ.
Let's have a look. We're going all the way down. We're going all the way down to Odell Beckham.
And I'm assuming, Rob, as you're scrolling, you could Control F this and search for OBJ.
There he is. So he is here. We have got him. So then we can go quickly back to Baltimore. And who would you like to take out?
I guess I'm assuming Mike Thomas or Dante Deem, whoever that is.
Dante Demas, yeah. Right, let's take Mike Thomas out. So
if you just type Odell, it will come up. Yeah, that is unbelievable.
There he is. Yeah, and what we'll do, it will change his projections as well. So the yards will have moved around. So targets wise, are we saying the same for 13, or are we going to move some of these targets around?
So that was going to be my initial next question: is do you still have to put the targets you think, or do you put in the target percentage and then does it auto fill the targets that way? So if you think,
yes, we have to put the targets in.
Oh, okay. So you don't think Odell Beckham's going to get 25% of the target share, therefore he'll get X amount of targets and adjust everybody else.
Yeah. So you work on the targets, and that will give you the percentage of the targets that will come out of that as well.
Right. Okay. I didn't know whether it was going to adjust everybody else. If you put in, all you had to do then was put in the target percentage you thought that player was going to receive, and then it would tweak everybody else. That would. Yeah. Okay. Oh man, this is straight off the cuff, off the bat. This is a difficult thing to, do we think Beckham's going to be the most targeted receiver? I'm not sure he is. I seem to think when he was with the Rams, he was getting maybe 7 or 8 a game, if that. Are we expecting him to play a full season? Probably not. No. I think we're looking at about 65 to 70 targets for OBJ, probably. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I reckon that's probably right. Like similar amount to what I predicted Zay Flowers to get. I think Odell is probably a more attractive option. He's a red zone target, isn't he? He's a good option there. So let's say we filter in. Let's take some off Nelson Aguilar. There we go, and that gives us 30 up here. So we can add that on to here, 43.
Which is what's good about this model, guys, is if you're not watching, is when because there are passing targets projected of 540, when you spread that throughout the team, it tells you how many are remaining. So we removed some off of Nelson Aguilar, and it told us we had 30 left remaining after Odell Beckham's what we thought. So Rob's now changed Nelson Aguilar down to 17. And he's tweaking it as I speak to you, which makes it very difficult, Rob, to describe to those people at home. But we've currently got now Beckham at 68, Zay Flowers at 53, Devin Duvernay at 55, which I think may be slightly high, and Rashad Bateman taking 105, considering he's now back at OTAs and apparently running full route trees and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we've now got Beckham with 68 targets, 43 receptions. Does that bring in his... what does that bring in for Beckham when you brought him into the list, Rob? Does it bring in his catch percentage from the past, or is it based on what you think his target percentage is going to be?
So it's based upon an average of his yards per reception, and then the receptions are based upon the Now, this is probably where it's a bit controversial because it's based upon the quarterback's average completion rate for the last 3 years, if they've played 3 years.
Okay. Because that would mean any Indianapolis Colts in a whole world of trouble with Richardson's.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. I mean, you say controversial. Everybody has to have a take, and not a take, but everybody has to have a way of working out the madness. You know, it's otherwise you're just sticking pictures on the wall and throwing darts at them.
Absolutely.
So there has to be some sort of baseline for you to work your model off of. Otherwise, we're just stabbing in the dark, essentially, aren't we?
Yes, and in the past, this model has been based upon each player's individual catch percentage. However, for the ease of the model, it is just based upon one player's average passing completion rather than 15 individual catch percentages. Because what that is could also be based on is a player moving from a team to team, and they could be operating with a different quarterback last season compared to this one. And that quarterback might not be as accurate. So basing it upon their current quarterback is probably a better way of looking at it rather than basing it on quarterbacks that they have played in the past.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. I mean, and we might see this year that Lamar Jackson's numbers completely change with a new OC. We could see, yards per attempt increase or amount of deep targets increase, and that will change the model for next year. But like I said, there has to be a baseline, and that's for you to create this. That's what works for you, which is why I think this is great, because it's also not dispelling the myth, but it's creating a visual and terrible audio for those not looking at YouTube right now, for those, for something to build off of. So Odell Beckham's in there, 572 receiving yards, receiving touchdowns of 0. Is that something you need to tweak as well, Rob, based on how many touchdowns we think he's going to get? And then we have to take off of other people's receiving touchdowns, sorry.
Well, it depends, because if Odell Beckham is going to provide, a red zone option for Lamar, which, he has been used for in the past, then perhaps we will end up increasing Lamar's number of touchdowns, which he's currently on 25 touchdowns with 12 interceptions, which is, again, very similar to what his output has been in the past. But then that is based upon the old schemes where it's more of a running based offense rather than a passing one. So I'm happy to add in Odell's touchdowns here as a red zone option.
So I was just going to say, based on the 100 pass attempts more, that's nearly 20% pass attempts more. It would be interesting to work out how many pass attempts Lamar has in the red zone, and then work out what. I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but obviously I think if you're throwing 20%, nearly 20% more, you're going to be throwing more in the red zone. Therefore, will you get 20% more touchdowns from what you got in the red zone last year? I don't know. I'm just trying to work out in my head what we think Beckham could, if he's getting, I don't know what his touchdown percentage off of catches is, but let's say, off of 43 receptions, it's not unfeasible, I don't think, for him to have a 10% touchdown rate if he's a red zone target. So for him to get 4 touchdowns, that increases, where are we now at the amount of touchdowns? What do we think? Passing 25. So, 10% is 2.5, 20% if you increase the 20% passing touchdown rate, because you've worked that out over the last few years, adding 4 touchdown receptions for Odell Beckham is around 20% increase on his passing touchdowns. So if we think he is going to pass 20% more, it might well be 3, because obviously he's not going to complete 100% of those extra 20% of passes. True. But if he does complete 75% of those passes to Odell in the end zone, then I think the range of outcomes between 3 and 4 touchdowns isn't unreasonable. Yeah,
and because he will be one of the go-to targets there, I'm happy to go with the upper end and say it would be 4. So let's put 4 in, and that will produce 17. And the sheet is now saying that Lamar has got 29 passing touchdowns and 12 interceptions. So I feel that could be fairly realistic for that change in the scheme.
Is the interceptions based on his previous year's touchdown to interception ratio, Rob?
It should be, but it's just a number at the moment. It is based upon an average, but there's no actual formula to produce that interception number. That is purely looking at the past 3 or 4 years and giving that average number of 12.
So do you think along those lines, we should then perhaps potentially increase it by what his percentage of touchdowns to interceptions is for an extra 20% passing or 17% pass attempts? Does that make sense?
So I think like 13, 14 would probably work out with that as well, especially if the number of passes goes up, the number of interceptions theoretically should go up as well because it's in the air more, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm assuming that he's going to be more aggressive downfield as well with the pass attempt. So therefore, I think he's playing. I think 14 is not an unreasonable number to assume that Lamar throws. And this, Rob, is why I wanted to have this podcast chat, because we're talking through the rankings procedures like we did years ago. We sat down, I think it was over 3 nights. We spent 4 hours every night going through the rankings, talking about, because I was confident to do it on my own, but I like to run stuff past everybody in my entire life. I'm not just one to, so I figured, well, let's have this chat about rankings, because this is how you get into creating rankings. You want to, if you want to get into rankings, but you're not sure how, have a chat with someone about it. Use a sheet like this or this sheet, and you don't have to have it as gospel because you've got this sheet. It doesn't have to be, well, these are the rankings I have to use for my entire fantasy football. Even for me, it helped me just to process my thoughts on fantasy football and gain a bit more knowledge around stats and around percentages and teams and stuff like that. And what's good is, you've got the players on the teams here. You might not know that Keaton Mitchell is a running back for Baltimore, whereas once you open the sheet, you can see that there he is. And I think, for me, I thought it was a good process for us to show the listeners, Rush Nation, how rankings, how you achieve your rankings, how I'm going to help probably do mine if I do them by using the sheet which you've kindly sent me, because it's such a fantastic tool to try and work out. And if you do use it to work out, then you, like I said at the beginning, if your home league is crazy, you can plug the settings in, the scoring in, and then wham bam, all of a sudden Odell Beckham, no one thinks he's going to be drafted. But if you get 25 points for a red zone touchdown, which I know is pretty impossible, then Odell Beckham could be a sleeper that you want to play if it's a really deep league. That's a out there wild thing to say, but those things, it can happen through spotting in differences in your rankings to other people's, which is why we're here. We don't want to be everybody reading the Fantasy Pros rankings. We want to be trying to find niches and crevices that we can exploit in our fantasy football leagues. Really, I mean, it comes down to using data like this to create our own rankings, I suppose.
I think that's really important. In that we have just had this discussion. We've talked through, scenarios. It's using the knowledge that we have in our heads. And sometimes people are like, well, how can I demonstrate this knowledge? And by putting it down on something like this, it not only makes things clearer, but it keeps it from all up here. Like, to be able to see it on the page does help make things really easy in organizing your thoughts, and be able to produce those final rankings at the end with the tiers, which is an option on this one as well. That's something that's added in as well. It doesn't have to be I've got this player at quarterback 1, I've got this player at quarterback 2. There's the option of adding tiers in, so that does make things, it does make a bit more generalized, but it also doesn't commit you to putting a player atop that pedestal on their own.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming, Rob, we've been through the wide receiver, and we've increased, you've increased, sorry, I keep saying we, but you've increased the passing attempts here at Baltimore to 540 because Greg Roman's come in. No, Greg Roman's gone. Sorry, otherwise you can reduce that back down 100. How has that flipped with the rushing attempts projection and so forth like that? Do you have them with a higher number? Do you have them with a lower number? And then also, how do you split the carries? Again, statistically, are you using historical data to split the carries based on previous years?
Partially based on previous years. So there's another spreadsheet that I've produced that's based upon play splits in the last 2 years. And sometimes it is the same head coach, sometimes it's not. But it's also breaking it down between the running back 1, the running back 2, and the running back 3 in terms of carries. I've also done it for targets as well. But you can see that with some teams, there's a definite correlation between there being a workhorse running back, and then the running back 2 and the running back 3 get significantly less carries. However, in a case of Baltimore, like this, the running back 1 and the running back 2 are a lot closer together than some teams out there, which is why you can see Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins has got 195. Gus Edwards has got 105, which is not an insignificant number of carries for a running back 2.
No.
So it is taken into account that, different teams do use the personnel in different ways as well.
But not only that, you say that 39% of the rushing attempts for J.K. Dobbins is considering teams don't use bell cows, I would say that 40% for the sake of 1% is a significant amount of carries when you've got Lamar, who is carrying the ball 24% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That for 39% from J.K. Dobbins, if that is a season-long projection and he ends up with 194 PPR points, would be very, very happy with a round 4 or 5 selection in your fantasy football draft. So, people think maybe the gap isn't. I thought the gap would be closer than that between Dobbins and Gus Edwards. So, and again, visualizing it, head over to YouTube if you're still listening to the audio version, because you can see right in front of you, the data is right there. It helps to mentally vomit it rather than, like you said, storing it in your head, vomit it all out onto the screen. And then you can see, well, actually, maybe Dobbins is a bit of a value at the moment where he's being drafted. Yeah.
And equally, you might think, well, actually, looking at that, maybe Dobbins doesn't get that many carries. So that actually does reduce it down because, in your head, you've actually predicted Baltimore to get 700 rush attempts, which obviously doesn't work if they're going to raise their number of passing attempts. So it just adds that level of realism, and also gives you the flexibility to move those numbers around.
Yeah, but we may well see Baltimore run more plays per year this year than they have done in previous because of the more aggressive offensive coaching. There's still no slouch on defense. We know that Baltimore have a pretty decent defense, and if they start ramping it up on offense, it could be more. There could be more pass attempts. Well, there's definitely going to be more pass attempts, and there could be less in the decreasing amount of rush attempts than we think. Maybe they're going to get more because of their being ahead, because of the aggressive pass game. And again, this is all baked into what we think. You put your thoughts down into this and it spits out a number. And whether it's completely right or completely wrong, you can look at it then and think, well, actually, that looks very, very wrong. Or I'm happy with my process. That could be a really good point that I could use in my draft to maybe sneak some value. So it is... it's really good. You need to be seeing it. You really do need to see it. Rob, so we've talked about splitting the touches. Are there any other factors we haven't talked about you consider when creating the numbers initially? So are there any things you think that should be used for the targets or the rush attempts that we haven't talked about?
Well, in terms of numbers, for example, for the rush attempts that do come up, you can have a look back through previous seasons and you can see, well, Baltimore actually had a significantly tougher schedule based on the teams they were facing. And actually, like I said, this year, it is going to be a nicer schedule based upon the teams they're playing. I've actually got Baltimore's division insanely high in terms of their records. I think I've got them all coming out as positive records. I don't think there's any team that ends up with less than 8 wins. They're doing very well based upon the other divisions that they're going to be facing. So when it comes to the conference games, that's also something you've got to factor in as well, is that they're going to be facing 3 very tough teams in 6 games of the season. Cincinnati, no slouches whatsoever, certainly in moving the ball and scoring. You've got Pittsburgh, who actually fancied to do very well next season. I know Pitsy doesn't like me saying that because he thinks it's a big jinx. But I actually think Pittsburgh are going to get, I think I've got them above 10 wins, potentially even 12 and 5 this season, which is wild. And then, Cleveland, I think I've got them not doing as well in the conference games, but the other games that they're playing, they do very well there as well. They're they've got quite a nice set of fixtures in the non-conference teams. So that has also factored in. Like I've looked at who are they playing, and even looked at the run of games as well. Like you look where Baltimore's bye week is. It's week 13. You've got to consider, could they be out of the running by then? In my opinion, they won't be. So they'll need to keep, using the players that they rely on, and that has also factored into some other teams as well.
So let's go back to the start of your process in this ranking then. Did you create your season-long records and then work off of that, or is that a separate product that you've just created?
As in looking at what the fixtures for their season?
Yeah, well, sort of. Did you, obviously with their fixtures, you've then come up with a record for the season, and you say Baltimore's division is insanely high. Did you use those records before you then created this based on wins and losses and what you thought was going to happen? Or did you create this and the other thing separate? Are they different entities, or do they factor in?
They do factor in a way. So something else that a lot of analysts do focus on, and something that I decided to dabble in a little bit this time, is how many one-score games each team won and how many 15-point games each team had. So did they win by more than 15 points, or did they lose by more than 15 points? And I think that kind of scoreline there does show a difference in strengths between teams. And the one-score games, where there was less than 6 points in it, I think there was one team in particular, I'm trying to recall which one. I think it was maybe the Colts. The Colts lost, did a lot of, let me have a look on here. I've got it on here. So I'll use Las Vegas as a good example. So Las Vegas had 13 one-score games. They lost 10 of them and won 3. So that shows that could have gone either way, and that might have changed a game script depending on what had happened. Kansas City, they had 10 one-score games. They won 7, lost 3, but then they also had 4 15-point gap games where they won all 4. They were very dominant. They won all 6 conference games as well. And I've predicted them to do the same this year. So ordinarily that might have an effect on what my rankings do turn out like. But obviously we know they've got Mahomes. Mahomes does like to pass the ball.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things. So you can't just take like their scores and the predictions. You've also got to think about the players that they've got as well. And that's ultimately that's what makes the difference with some teams as well. It's the star quality, not.
So let's talk some rookies then, Rob. Obviously, we're at that point in the season with your rookies, and if you would be so kind as to drag Arizona up, just because. No, not Arizona, Atlanta, because that's where Bijan is. He's obviously everybody's 101. With Bijan, how did you get to his percentages and attempts and stuff like that? What did you base it on, seeing as that we haven't seen him in the NFL?
Mm-hmm. Primarily, it's been based on where they've been picked. If they've been picked very highly, it's very clear that the team has picked them there for a reason. Otherwise, that they may have moved down the draft. They may have gone for other needs in the team. I have also looked at Arthur Smith as well. He's a very run-heavy team coach.
Yep.
He as we've seen with Derrick Henry in the past, he just loves to put those running backs, and he just loves to run them. And what we can see on the screen at the moment is that I've got Bijan Robinson with 220 rush attempts, which is far more than Dobbins. But we've also got Tyler Algier with 150. So again, he's not missing out either, because I know that once Arthur Smith gets on the ground, he will just keep plugging away. So it's very much based on need. For some other rookies as well, it's based upon who they've got at the position already. So I don't know if we can see on the screen at the moment, we've got Atlanta with the 6 wide receivers. There's not a lot of big names there aside from Drake London. So if they'd have brought in another wide receiver, which from looks like they did bring anyone in the draft as a wide receiver, there's not a whole lot there to stand in a rookie's way to make a name for themselves, and you've got to really consider that when it comes to putting these rankings in. Can they break into the team? And have they shown anything in the past in the college games? Because people do look at college college film, and it's the path to getting those, getting on the field is a big part of giving them targets and giving them, fantasy points at the end of the day.
Have you used any collegiate production in your ranking percentages and stuff, Rob?
There is some correlation. There's not a whole lot.
No, that's absolutely fine. This was going to be my segue on to seeing your tiers. So for Anthony Richardson, obviously his pass percentage in college was abysmal. I'm assuming you haven't put that in as his pass percentage now.
No, it is probably slightly less. I think I've probably got him in about around 50% completion, which isn't great compared to some of the other ones, to be honest. I think at the moment I've only got the 3 teams filled in, but I definitely know that Richardson's pass percentage would definitely affect the other teams, like you said before, the Indianapolis Colts receivers in terms of their completions and their yards and their fantasy points.
Okay, interesting. Is there a chance we could see how the tiers work? I know you've only got 3 teams plugged in, so it's not going to be a true, but it will show us how the tier procedure works with this sheet, right?
So we will start with quarterback rankings,
which is a tab on the bottom for those not watching.
Yeah, you can go back to the main screen and do it that way. There is a way to go back to the main screen on each screen, but at the moment, as we can see on here, we have got quarterback 1, Lamar Jackson, quarterback 2, Kyler Murray, and these tiers here, these are based upon the differences in points between. So you can set the difference in points. So I think, at the moment, I think I've got maybe 15 points between each tier, which is, around 3 passing touchdowns, based on quarterbacks. So yeah, it will break down. Lamar Jackson is tier 1, Kyle Murray is tier 2, Desmond Ridder is 3, Heineke far back as 4 because he's going to feature. I think he's going to feature a little bit at Atlanta because they're not completely sold on Desmond Ridder just yet. He may come in for like the odd point or 2, and then we look at the running back one. It's a bit clearer here. So as you can see, Bijan is up at number 1 in the standard tier. What's quite nice is that if I click on these buttons at the side here, so if I click to PPR, that will also change the tier on the side as well. And so now the PPR tier is still Bijan at the top.
Yeah. And when you say you can customize the difference in points between the tier, is that something you can do in the sheet, or is that something you've set and you can change? Does that
yes,
make
it
sense?
is. So if you come to scoring settings at the bottom, you can also, so on here, custom ranking tier point gap. So you can change the gap in points. So say, for example, if you set it to 7 on the running backs, we will change it. We'll change it to 15. Let's be crazy. And then we'll bring it back to here. So there will be a change in some of these rankings now. Certainly in some of the tiers here in column I. So you can.
Would you have to then click on the custom tab for that to tier, for instance? Just because I noticed that there was a custom tab.
Yeah, so it has changed a little bit. So yeah, the custom one is also taking into some points in the custom scoring.
Right.
So it is based on those ones there. There we go.
Right. Okay. No, that's cool. That works well. I just wondered, if you had in your league, there was a big points differential between X and Y positions, or the pass catchers that get a lot of targets are rewarded highly, then they would incrementally become a higher tier. So if you could plug that in, the difference, between between the top 10 wide receivers, because they all clearly got targeted more, then you could see that the gap between tier 1 and 2 in your league was 15 points or, whatever it may be. You can plug that into there and then it will work out the tiers for the...
And we've also got the so you can actually add in points and targets in the custom scoring as well if you wanted to. So you've got the option there. Same with the receptions. There's even options for tight end first down, receiving first downs, rushing first downs as well. So the passing first down, plenty of different ways to customize that custom scoring and affect the tiers that you want to affect.
quarterback rankings, Rob, you've got there. Is that it says tier and then custom tier? Is that because it's quarterbacks? Whereas when you click on running backs, it just has tier. It doesn't have the custom tier column.
So what this is showing here, it's showing the tier for the point system and then the tier for the custom system. Whereas on the running back one, if I click, so it says PPR tier in that column at the moment. If I click on standard, it will produce a standard tier.
But that's still based on is that based on the custom scoring that we just put into the model?
No, it is based upon each different score type. So the custom one, it will be based on, the custom one is based on the custom tier.
Right, okay. No, that's cool. I was a bit confused between the quarterback one having two and this one only having one, but then that's absolutely fine. I think, Rob, this has been enlightening for me visually over the last 50 minutes. If you are somehow listening to the audio podcast, please do go over to YouTube and check this out, because I think this is what people, whilst this is a terrifying prospect for somebody who has never ever done rankings before, the standard procedure for rankings is very, very easy, isn't it? You know, it can be as simple as finding past projections for a team, writing how many past projections that team has down and splitting down those between the players and working out, you know, what that works out of fantasy points at the end. It doesn't have to be, you know, scary, because especially if you are new to Google Sheets or Excel and you know, there's a whole load of colors, there's a whole load of names, numbers and columns, whereas actually because of the work you've done on this sheet, it's incredibly easy and intuitive to use, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But when we were talking about how long it would take us to do one team, about 3 years ago, I think it took us a couple of hours, didn't it? Just to type in, just to find out what the yards per reception is. I've tried to take as much of that work away as possible so that you can just simply type in the player that you want in each position, and it will give you, you know, you just put in the targets and it will give you like your receptions, it'll give you your yards. It's just saving up so much time. It probably takes about, you know, with a little bit of thought, maybe between 5 to 10 minutes to do one team. You know, you can produce an entire league's worth of rankings within an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. And that's without any alterations. You know, you could have a set of rankings done in an evening, which is, you know, frankly, would be unheard of 3 years ago. Yeah.
And it is, you know, it's taken the words away from me as to what I think can be achieved with this. But I think it all goes back to our initial conversation at the beginning of the pod, Rob, to where rankings I found them important for me to try and understand my leagues, or to try and understand leagues in general, as to what my thoughts, because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's not me, it's not my thoughts versus your thoughts, but it is, if you can somehow visualize and use your thoughts in fantasy football, rather than just, you know, why are we expected as a community to just go over to your, I want to say Fantasy Pros. I'm not hating on Fantasy Pros, but when you type in rankings, PPR rankings, because of Google algorithms, they're at the top along with a few others. You know, there's loads. 4 for 4 are fantastic. Fantasy Pros. The list goes on and on and on. You know, Murph does his rankings, and I don't know whether do you publish yours, or is it just for your internal destruction of your brain, Rob?
I only publish them on our group chats. I don't put them anywhere else. I relentlessly annoy you and Pitsy and Stormo and, you know, everyone in that chat with my predictions and rankings.
But I think it's fairly important for people to you don't have to have a go. I'm not saying you won't be playing fantasy properly if you're not having a go, but I found it incredibly useful to try and create some rankings, just to try and see if I was differentiating in my opinions from anybody else throughout the season. Because if you are in a standard league and your entire league is going over to Fantasy Pros and dragging their rankings, PPR rankings for your standard home league, and everybody's using the same cheat sheet, you might as well hit auto draft, because everybody's going to be, you know, well, they've gone, so I'll take them. You know, and whereas you're different, We always say zig when you zag and stuff like that. Be water, as the ballers say. And that is completely true. Use your own rankings to try and create a pivot point in your league.
And separate yourself as well. It will separate you from anyone else if they don't do it. I think one important outcome that came for me from using this system last year was whenever I was entering in a tournament, I would put in the custom scoring, and I would just try and get the best player that was available on the board. It doesn't matter if they were like 4 or 5 spaces down the list or like 10 spaces down the drafting list. And I'd like to think that it was one of the reasons that I made it to the Steve Rains Bowl final was because of some of the players that I picked. And fair play to Hannah, she took that title, but I was pleased to end up being in the run, and I think it did come down to me using this kind of model.
I think what I've learned from this, Rob, is that if you take fantasy football seriously and have a rankings model or some sort of procedure like you and Hannah do, then 2 5-yard people in the Steve Rains finals, not a terrible place to be. So it does show that. And if nothing else, if you've got a take on a player and you think, well, Devon A-Chain's going to have an unbelievable season because of this way, X, Y, and Z, and I've put this into my model, rather than just saying, I think he's going to have a good season. We've seen people get destroyed on Twitter for takes that they not necessarily don't need to be. Like, Twitter shouldn't be a thing for destroying people in the first place. Let's get that out there. It shouldn't be used for that. But if you've got something to say, well, actually, I projected this team to have this, and they're going to have this, and I think with the new OC, they're going to have this. Devon A-Chain, and I know none of those things are appropriate to Devon A-Chain, but a player like J.K. Dobbins, for instance, I think he's going to have a greater season than perhaps the rest of the fantasy community project, or he's going to have a worse because of this and because of that. And it gives you something to stand on when you're having conversations. And I'm not saying all conversations lead to war zone on Twitter, but if you are in a league which have got a fire chat where somebody takes a draft pick and be like, oh, what are you doing, you absolute clown? But you can then say, well, actually, hang on, this is potentially an outcome, or this could happen, or this has happened the last few years when this guy was at this team and he's moved to here now. It gives you some sort of backbone in a conversation. I'm not saying an argument, but in a conversation. And then doing that could enlighten the person you're talking to as to, oh, well, actually, maybe. And, and even going back to the start of the pod, Rob, when I said to you, I really enjoyed when you and I just went through the rankings, working out X and Y. I think you'll agree in saying that I said something that you agreed with that I hadn't thought of, and you said something that I agreed with. And of course, there were some things where I thought, well, actually, that's not going to happen, and you did the same. And you enlighten and enrich each other just through conversation about the rankings, and it's eternal knowledgeable growth that I think I enjoy in fantasy football. And doing rankings has helped me do that. Yeah,
I agree. And if there's anything that sums up a fantasy football community by sharing these ideas and sharing your thoughts on certain processes, on certain teams, and on certain players, then that's why it is a community. You don't want to be at each other's throats, and being able to have the confidence to put this stuff down and say, this is what I feel. You are entitled to your opinion, and this is how I produce my opinion. Then I think the community can only become stronger by people having their own rankings and not ideas that have just been pulled out of thin air. Absolutely. Substance behind the product, I think, is key to this. Rob, this has been fantastic, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your ranking sheets and models. Why don't you? I mean, everybody at 5 Yard already knows you from the Fast Action Friday pod, but if we have new listeners or people who perhaps didn't listen to Fast Action Friday, where can people find you in the World Wide Web and everywhere in between? So I'm currently trying my hardest to take over the 5 Yard social. So I'm putting things out there every few days about different teams and their projections and who we feel as the fantasy breakout players are. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but there's a little blue tick next to the 5 Yard profile now. Gotta keep things moving, keep ourselves visual. So trying to get that moving as much as we can. 5 Yard redraft team, we are brewing ideas behind the scenes, but I think we're with such busy lives at the moment and movings and new jobs and illness within families as well. We're trying to gather our thoughts together and produce something, and we will be back strong, I imagine, later on towards the season start. And then Fast as Friday, myself and Lewis and Pitsy, we're always talking about things we can do. We've already had an off-season show already, but we want to bring back the season show and get those little segments up. And again, there's another spreadsheet that I produced that will help me do that as well. Cannot help myself.
Some of the spreadsheets I've seen, Rob, that you've just had on your desktop as we've shared stuff over there, it's just the amount of colours and boxes for somebody who's colourblind is not easy. But I think just for somebody who isn't visually impaired, it is mind-boggling. So how you do all that is absolutely fantastic, and I doff my cap to you, sir. Again, if you're watching on the video, you will have seen me do that, and if you're still listening on the audio, I hope this wasn't too bad a listen without the visual aid of Rob's rankings. If you have any questions or queries about rankings, please do get in touch on Twitter at 5YardRob or at 5YardRush. Both accounts are more than happy to have a rankings conversation with anybody. Mm-hmm. Again, if you do fancy heading over to Patreon to support the podcast, head over there. Please like and subscribe on the YouTube. It really does help us get out there. Follow us on Twitter. Retweets are appreciated. But Rush Nation, until next week, as always, don't forget, keep rushing.